Story 1.
I never thought I'd be the kind of guy to end up in a story like this. My name's Tommy, and I'm just your average man, you know? Work a 9 to 5, pay the bills, and take whatever vacation time I can squeeze out of the grind. This year, I decided to do something different, something spontaneous. I booked a room at an old hotel off the beaten path, thinking it would be a quiet place to clear my head. The Grand Oak Hotel, it was called. Pictures online made it look rustic but charming. Boy, was I in for a surprise. The drive there was longer than I expected. The hotel sat isolated on a hill surrounded by dense woods, its grandeur faded with time. The moment I stepped into the lobby, a chill ran down my spine. Not because it was cold, the place was oddly warm, but because of how off it felt. The air was thick, and there was this smell, like old books mixed with something I couldn't quite place. The guy at the front desk, let's call him Deny, had this weird vibe about him. He was polite, but in a way that felt rehearsed, like he was playing a part in a play he'd performed too many times. He handed me the key to my room, 217, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Enjoy your stay," he said, and I could swear there was a hint of something else in his voice. A warning? Nah, couldn't be. The room itself was quaint. Old-fashioned furniture, a 4-poster bed, and a window that offered a view of the wood shrouded in mist. It was cozy in a way, but also kind of sad. Like the room was holding onto memories of better days. That night, things started getting weird. I heard noises, soft at first, like whispers just outside my comprehension. I figured it was just the old pipes or the wind. But then came the footsteps, not the sound of someone walking in the hallway. No, these were inside my room. Slow, deliberate steps moving from one end to the other. I turned on the light, heart racing, but there was nothing there. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day, I decided to explore the hotel a bit. Maybe talking to some other guests would make me feel less uneasy about the whole thing. But here's the kicker. I couldn't find any. Every time I thought I saw someone turning a corner or entering a room, when I got there, they were gone. And the staff? Other than Deny and a maid I briefly saw in the hallway, who avoided eye contact and scurried away when I tried to talk to her, there seemed to be no one else. I tried to leave then. Really, I did. But my car wouldn't start, and my phone had no signal. Classic, right? Like something straight out of a horror movie. The days started blending together. I would hear those footsteps every night and sometimes voices whispering my name. Deny assured me it was all in my head, but his assurances did little to ease my mind. One evening, driven by a mix of desperation and curiosity, I followed the sounds of what seemed like a low murmur coming from the ballroom. The door creaked open to reveal a scene that will haunt me forever. The room was filled with life-size porcelain statues. They looked like real people and seemed to be looking right into my eyes. For a second, I thought one of them moved. I didn't push my luck and check my guess. I decided to get out of there as soon as possible. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. Tom found me later, huddled in a corner of my room. He didn't seem surprised by my story. "You've seen them too?" he said, not as a question but as a fact. "They're trapped here, reliving their last moments over and over." "What? I don't understand you," I said. "Some places hold on to things," he replied with a shrug that seemed too casual for the gravity of his words. "Memories, emotions, souls." I left the Grand Oak Hotel the next day. Tom somehow got my car working again, and I haven't stopped looking over my shoulder since. You might think I'm crazy or making this up. Heck, part of me wishes I were. But every word is true. And sometimes late at night when the world is quiet, I can still hear those whispers calling my name, inviting me back to the Grand Oak Hotel. But you couldn't pay me enough to go back there. No, sir. Some things are best left alone.
Story 2.
I was never one for road trips, but there I was, in the middle of nowhere, with my car coughing its last breath of life right in front of a rundown motel. The sign flickered in a way that made you think it was trying to warn you off rather than welcome you. But with my phone dead and the next town probably miles away, I didn't have much of a choice. The lobby was empty except for an old man behind the counter. He looked up from his newspaper with a kind of indifference that made me feel like I was interrupting something important. "Need a room?" he asked, without much enthusiasm. "Yeah, just for the night." "My car broke down," I explained, hoping for a bit of sympathy or at least some acknowledgement of my predicament. He handed me a key with a wooden tag attached, marking room number 8. "End of the hallway," he said, pointing to his left without looking up from his paper again. The hallway was narrow and dimly lit, with each step on the carpet feeling like I was walking on something that hadn't been cleaned in decades. Room 8 was at the far end, and as soon as I opened the door, a musty smell greeted me. It wasn't welcoming, but it beat sleeping in my car in the middle of nowhere. After settling in, or as much as one could settle into a place like that, I decided to take a shower. The water took a while to heat up, and when it finally did, it came out in an erratic spray that alternated between too hot and too cold. I couldn't wait to get out of there. Wrapped in a towel, I noticed something odd. The mirror didn't fog up from the steam. In fact, it looked like it hadn't seen steam or a clean cloth in years. I wiped at it with my hand, half expecting to wipe away years of grime, but my hand moved through the air as if the mirror wasn't there at all. I leaned in closer. My curiosity piqued despite the unsettling feeling creeping up my spine. That's when I saw it, or didn't see it, rather. My reflection wasn't there. I waved my hand, jumped a bit, even made a face, but nothing appeared in the mirror. It was as if I had become invisible. Panic set in for a moment before I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the lighting in the room was weird, or maybe there was something wrong with the mirror itself. I decided to ignore it, thinking maybe I was just tired and seeing things. I tried to sleep, but every little noise kept me awake. The walls seemed too thin. I could hear footsteps outside my door at odd intervals throughout the night. At one point, it sounded like someone was trying the doorknob, but when I got up to check, there was no one there. Morning couldn't come soon enough. I packed my things and headed to the lobby to return the key. The old man was still there, looking exactly like he had the night before. "Sleep well?" he asked, with what I thought might be a smirk. "Not really," I admitted. "And there's something wrong with the mirror in room 8. It doesn't show reflections." He chuckled, a sound that didn't quite reach his eyes. "That old thing. We've had complaints about it before. Some say it's haunted, others think it's just broken, but we don't have the heart to get rid of it. Adds character to the place, don't you think?" I didn't think so, but I didn't say anything. I just handed him the key and left as quickly as I could. Once outside, I took a deep breath of fresh air, and almost laughed at myself for getting worked up over a stupid mirror. That is until I got to my car and saw my reflection in the window, or rather, didn't see it. My reflection was gone, just like in the mirror in room 8. I stood there for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of it all. Eventually, my reflection did come back, fading into view as if it had been there all along and I was just seeing things. But I know what happened, and I know it wasn't just my imagination. I never found out what was wrong with that mirror, or why it happened to me. And honestly, I don't think I want to know. Some things are better left unexplained. All I know is that I'll never forget my stay at that motel, and I'll always check for my reflection first thing whenever I go anywhere new, just to be sure.
Story 3.
I've always been a bit of a loner, preferring the company of a good book over people. So when I decided to take a solo trip to a small, quaint hotel by the seaside, it seemed like the perfect escape. The hotel was this charming, slightly run-down place that looked like it had seen better days, but still held on to a certain allure that you couldn't help but be drawn to. I arrived late in the afternoon, and the first thing that struck me was the silence. It was the off-season, so I wasn't expecting a crowd, but there was an eerie stillness that made me feel like I was the only person for miles. The hotel owner, Mrs. Collins, was a sweet old lady who greeted me with a warm smile and showed me to my room on the second floor. It was a cozy room with a view of the sea, and I immediately felt at ease. The first couple of days were exactly what I needed. I spent my time exploring the small town, reading by the beach, and enjoying the peace and quiet. However, on the third night, things started to get strange. I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when I heard what sounded like footsteps in the hallway outside my room. I figured it was just another guest, but the steps seemed to pace back and forth without ever fading away. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to take a look. I opened my door just a crack and peered out into the dimly lit hallway. There was no one there. Feeling a bit foolish, I closed my door and tried to go back to sleep. But the footsteps started again, this time stopping right outside my door. My heart was racing at this point, but when I checked again, the hallway was empty. The next morning, I mentioned it to Mrs. Collins over breakfast, trying to keep it light. She paused for a moment before telling me that I was the only guest staying at the hotel. My mind raced with possibilities, but I didn't want to seem paranoid, so I just laughed it off and went about my day. But things only got weirder from there. Objects in my room started to move on their own. My book would be on the nightstand when I went to sleep and on the floor on the other side of the room when I woke up. My shoes would be neatly placed by the door at night and scattered around the room in the morning. I tried to rationalize it all, thinking maybe I was just forgetful or not paying attention. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. It all came to a head on my last night when I woke up to find my room freezing cold, despite it being a warm summer night. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, and that's when I saw it, a shadowy figure standing at the foot of my bed. I blinked several times, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me in the dark, but it didn't go away. It just stood there, watching me. I wanted to scream or run, but I was paralyzed with fear. After what felt like an eternity, it slowly faded away until I was alone again. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night and left as soon as the sun came up, without even saying goodbye to Mrs. Collins. As I drove away from that hotel, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. It's been years since that trip, and I've tried to convince myself it was all just a product of my imagination or maybe a sleep paralysis. But why sometimes I still hear those footsteps pacing outside my door. And I wonder if whatever was in that hotel followed me home.
Story 4.
I've never been one for fancy places, but when my sister Jess said she'd booked us a weekend at one of those high-end hotels downtown for my birthday, I couldn't say no. She was all about the glitz and glamour, always trying to sprinkle a little sparkle on my otherwise plain life. The hotel was something out of a magazine, with its grand entrance and staff who treated you like royalty the moment you stepped through the door. Our room was on the 12th floor, overlooking the city with a view that took your breath away. It was all going so well until the second night. We had just returned from dinner, laughing about some silly joke Jess had made, when we noticed the door to our room was slightly ajar. We both paused, a silent agreement that this wasn't right. Jess pushed the door open slowly and we peeked inside. Nothing seemed out of place, but there was a feeling in the air, like someone had just left. We did a quick check, looking under the bed and in the closet, half joking about finding a boogeyman hiding there, but everything was as we left it. We tried to brush off the unease, chalking it up to hotel staff maybe doing a turn-down service we weren't aware of. But deep down, we both felt something was off. That night, as we tried to sleep, the air in the room felt heavy, almost suffocating. I tossed and turned, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. I must have drifted off at some point because I woke up to Jess shaking me awake. Her eyes were wide with fear. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. "Hear what?" I mumbled, still half asleep. "That noise. Like someone's in here with us." We both sat up, straining our ears. The room was silent except for the distant hum of the city below. Then we heard it. A soft, creaking sound, like someone stepping on an old wooden floorboard. But our room was carpeted. The sound seemed to move circling around us, but there was no one there. We were paralyzed with fear, too scared to even scream. Jess reached for the phone by her bed and dialed the front desk, her voice barely a whisper as she explained what was happening. They promised to send security up immediately. We waited, huddled together on the bed, jumping at every little sound. Security found nothing. They did a thorough search of our room and even checked the hallways and neighboring rooms. But everything was as it should be. They suggested maybe we were just tired and hearing things, but we knew better. We knew what we heard. Unable to sleep, we packed our bags and checked out in the middle of the night. The hotel staff looked at us like we were crazy, but we didn't care. We just wanted to get away from that place. Once we were safely back home, we tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe it was just our imagination, running wild, or maybe there was a logical explanation for the noises we heard. But deep down, we couldn't shake the feeling that something unnatural had occurred in that hotel room. We might have tried to forget that night, but fate had a different plan. A few days later, Jess received an anonymous package. Inside was a small, old-fashioned key with a note that read, "For the door you never opened." Chills ran down our spines as we realized there was one place we hadn't checked that night. The tiny door camouflaged in the wall decor, which we had mistaken for an artist's element. Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, we contacted the hotel and asked about the door. The manager hesitated before revealing that decades ago, the room used to be part of a larger suite with a hidden compartment used during Prohibition times. No guest had ever reported finding it since then. We knew we had to go back. This time, equipped with cameras and a sense of determination, we returned to the room. With trembling hands, Jess inserted the key into the hidden door's lock and turned it. The door creaked open to reveal a small space filled with antique furniture and dust-covered bottles of alcohol. And there, sitting on an old chair, was an envelope. Inside was a letter from a woman who confessed to having lived secretly in hidden compartments of various hotels during her life in the early 1900s. She wrote of her loneliness and how she found solace in leaving subtle signs of her presence for guests to find. Her final wish was for someone to discover her last hiding spot and share her story. The realization that our terrifying experience was connected to a lonely soul from the past turned our fear into empathy. And now we are sharing this story with you, dear listener. That night in the hotel transformed from a haunting memory into an unforgettable adventure that bonded Jess and me even closer. And though I've stayed in many hotels since then, I always keep an eye out for hidden doors, half hoping for another mystery to solve.